Game over. Game over. Lights out. You've just been completely obliterated publicly.
Cool.
With your wait, you've been caught. You've been folded like a chair, caught with your pants down. I just had another room. Like, if anyone wants to, like any theist here wants to like respond to how they think that if God's mind can exist without an external world, um, then how does it follow from that Cartesian scenarios wouldn't be logically possible, right? And if Cartesian scenarios are logically possible, how is it the case that God is omniscient? Does anyone want to like dive into that?
Wow, I literally was about to say definitely not Jawad, and he left. That is power.
All right, Khalil, are you there? Do you want to engage with the argument?
Or does any theist would any theist like it explained again as
Well, here's how it goes, right? If God's mind, sans creation, exists without an external world, then content internalism is true. If content internalism is true, then Cartesian scenarios are logically possible. Conclusion one, therefore, if God's mind, sans creation, exists without an external world, then Cartesian scenarios are logically possible. That's hypothetical syllogism one. And then P3, if Cartesian scenarios are logically possible, then omniscience is impossible, right? If omniscience is impossible, then God cannot exist. So hypothetical syllogism 2 is if Cartesian scenarios are logically possible, then God cannot exist. So does anyone here want to respond to or object to any one of the premises in the arguments?
I'll speak on behalf of the theists and say that Cartesian scenarios are impossible in virtue of the fact that God's omniscient, and the proof of his
Yeah, that's
omniscience
just a big. Yeah, but
is
that's just a big
sorry, Dar,
question
sorry,
again.
I haven't finished. Sorry, and the proof of his omniscience is that he's omniscient.
Yeah, that's just begging the question against the argument, right? Because if Cartesian scenarios are impossible, then it's not going to be the case that internalism is true, right? But if internalism isn't true, then it's not going to be the case that a mind can exist without an external world.
Yeah, so then it means that God
Yeah,
could have created the universe, basically.
yeah, but how is just stating that God knows all true propositions not show that the Cartesian scenarios are logically possible? I don't get it.
No, sorry, I was just taking the piss. Yeah, it wasn't a serious response.
That's just to restate the claim that he knows all true propositions, right? But in virtue of what? In virtue of what would he necessarily know all true propositions if it's in fact the case that there's no logical contradiction in him like being systematically deceived about his beliefs, right? And that's just to say that in this scenario there's no problem in positing like some Cartesianism to God, in the same way that there's no problem in positing a Cartesian scenario to like our minds, right? To just say that he's omniscient is actually just to bolster the argument in some way, right? Because then we can just ask you, well, how is he justified in knowing all true propositions? Well, some of them want to say, well, God doesn't need to justify his beliefs. Okay, then how does he have knowledge then if he's not justifying his beliefs? And even if you get an account of knowledge, what as long as the Cartesian scenarios are possible, you could just apply the skepticism to that account of knowledge. Like you could be radically deceived that that account of knowledge is true, right?
Yeah, I haven't got a good response to this argument yet. I haven't. It's always just been a restating of omniscience. It's begging the question.
Yeah, but I mean, let's not like pat ourselves on the back on yet. Does anyone want to like respond?
I don't think they're going to engage. I was actually going to run that argument before I got onto this with the other guy.
This person saying that Himothy, what? The only thing that Himothy did was like parody the response that God knows everything. Like, how does that? How is that a response? As long as the scenarios are possible, he could be radically deceived that he knows everything. Like, are you kidding me? And if you think that's impossible, then just show the contradiction, right? Just show why Cartesian skeptical scenarios don't apply here.
Yeah, I mean, if I don't know if Khalil, if you're busy, if there's people in the audience that maybe want to tackle the argument or have a response, you can let them up maybe. I mean, yeah, one, I imagine argument, I think, obviously I haven't really thought it through, but I guess if you um eschew uh God being a creator and then just saying that the universe has sort of coexisted with God eternally, then
Wait. The universe is eternal. Why it doesn't need to be created? I don't know
that's what I'm
why you
saying. That's what no,
posit.
that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. So I'm saying if you eschew or not eschew, if you forego God's
Yeah, but then
sort of
that's just
creator
to
attribute,
affirm externalism.
yeah, that's what I mean. So you say that
Can you guys hear me?
oh yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I've been trying to get my damn mic working for the last 15 minutes. Yeah, I have my phone charging in my truck and I'm on my headphones, so I'm not by my phone to add anybody else to the stage or anything like that. There was one person that wanted to get added to the stage. I honestly don't know enough about, would you say, Cartesian scenarios. I don't really know enough about that to even engage with the argument.
Like it can be simplified though. It's just basically, well, if God was replete with so presumably you believe God was omniscient, so he knows all true propositions. But if he was replete with all of those, and correct me if I'm wrong, Duff, if I'm not representing the argument right. But if he was replete with all, or fully furnished with all of the knowledge of these true propositions, sans creation, right? It would mean that it commits you to like basically content internalism or internalism, um, in that he is unable to have sort of self-awareness or to juxtapose it with an
No,
external
that's
world.
wrong. That's wrong. Let me start. So it's just referring to like most of your beliefs just being a product of self knowledge, right? So that's one aspect to talk about internalism, and the other aspect is just that the meanings of words, right? Like I am having an experience. The meaning of that is going to be a byproduct of the utterer, the person who's uttering out that proposition. The meaning isn't going to refer to anything external from that mind because there is no world. There's just the mind, right? There's no
Yeah, so I
world
would
to.
just say I would just say that God's thoughts are propositional, and if God's thoughts are propositional, we can't really make inferences on what they entail and what they do.
Yeah, that's just to affirm. That's just to affirm internalism, right? That's just what internalism is. It's just
No,
that
I'm
the
actually just appealing to mystery. I'm not inferring to internalism at all. I'm just saying that I don't. There's most likely a distinction between God's thoughts and our thoughts, and the only way that we can try and describe thoughts and justify true beliefs is how we believe them. And if God's thoughts are propositional and not like our thoughts, then it seems as if that his thoughts are going to be derived in a different way. So to make the argument using the human conception of thoughts, I would just say that God's thoughts are different.
it would look, even if God's thoughts are different, right? That doesn't really address the argument. Like the argument,
No, it does. It's saying that the argument is assuming that God's thoughts are a specific way and can be
no,
handled in a
it's
specific
not.
manner.
Well, how does it say that? Is all it's saying? All it's saying that if God's mind can exist without an external world, right? Then internalism is true. That's just to
What is
affirm
God's mind?
internalism. It doesn't have to do with how you acquire beliefs, right? All it
What
has to do with on whether or not your beliefs are reliable. That there is,
what is God's mind?
given the fact that there is no external world.
What is God's mind?
Well, if God is a mind and he's taken to be like some sort of agent, then I think that agent has intentional states like beliefs and desires, right?
There we go. Now you're thinking about beliefs and desires in the same sense that humans do. So this is why I reject
I
the
didn't
argument.
mention the word human though.
Okay, so how are you going to critique something that you have no understanding of?
Wait, but who said that we were comparing humans to gods? I don't get it. All
You're
we're saying
talking
is
about
that
God's beliefs. Necessarily, you're
yeah,
talking
but
about God's beliefs.
God's beliefs.
So
Look, an agent's beliefs are just their commitments about like a dosastic attitude, like a proposition, right? So
So when you say an
if
agent, are you
God,
referring to humans and God?
yeah, I'm referring to
There
just
you go. There's
agent
a conflation. That's
simpliciter.
why I reject the argument.
So you reject the argument because there's some other account of beliefs that doesn't fall victim to this argument. Like
I,
even if,
I, I, I reject the account because I think God's thoughts are not comparable to our thoughts.
but
But it's not
okay,
about. But
whatever, right? But look, the point is that even if God has shma beliefs, right, and we just have beliefs, like that doesn't address the argument. The argument is that if God's beliefs exist without an external world, there's no contradiction in positing skeptical scenarios to God. Because we can just ask you, in what sense are God's beliefs that are different from ours, how are those beliefs reliable if there's no external world to furnish mental content, right?
Hold on, my work's calling me.
The argument doesn't really rest upon this difference between human beliefs and divine beliefs. Like, who cares, right? It doesn't matter what category of beliefs we're talking about. All we're saying is that whatever beliefs he has, as long as
Dart,
it,
Dart, did you say God's beliefs?
yeah.
Does that make sense to you? God's beliefs? Believing in something is that like that you don't have complete knowledge about, but you believe it. To
Wait.
God,
You don't
everything is
think
the
God
truth.
has beliefs?
To God, everything is truth. He knows.
No, but I'm asking you, do you think that God has beliefs?
Oh, I got a call in the middle there. Did you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, to God, there's no such thing as beliefs. He knows the entire truth, everything.
Also, how is
So I
God
don't know what you
omniscient
mean
if he
by
doesn't have
God's beliefs.
beliefs?
See how he keeps
I believe in God
he
because
needs to
but
I
hold on.
cannot
he
see
needs
Can I
him. I have evidences that I believe in God, but God's belief
Yeah, how are you
that
taking
doesn't.
the
I
Khalil,
can't
problem?
Khalil,
comprehend that.
Khalil, can I ask it to you maybe this way? Maybe this is a little bit less controversial, right, and contentious. If if God is omniscient, for instance, right, and just think of like two identical realities, for instance, right. One is that God is replete with all knowledge of all true propositions, and he has not created the universe. This is sans creation. then God is replete with knowledge of all true propositions, and he has created the universe. How would he know the difference between those two universes or those two realities if he knows all true propositions in both, but there is some distinction between the two?
Perfect.
What fact
So
would what fact
so
would
then I would just I could just I'm not saying I'm going to. I could just appeal to some type of Neoplatonism
in what sense? I'm not sure how that extricates you. In
in the
what sense?
sense that it's not God that has it's God that is omniscient, but he's omniscient because he creates the divine intellect and the divine
Yeah, but
soul.
that's just to reaffirm what God's nature is. That's not showing
It's not talking
he
about God's
how
nature.
he's justified in believing that one universe is distinct from the other. You're
No,
actually
no,
addressing
please
the
don't
question.
define how my model is. I mean, that's not very. It's
No,
not very
but you
promising
know what,
to
Khalil,
Yeah, but
define how
when
respectfully.
you
my
say
model
you
is.
could, you're just positing what it means for God to have knowledge of all true
Is this
propositions.
not an argument against the existence of God?
It is
No,
an
but
argument against the
Okay, so then
existence.
I could hold a worldview that takes this argument and totally throws it out the
no,
window
but Khalil,
But
without me
how
just
does
saying
it
that I
throw it out the
reject the
window? You're
premises
just
simply
stating
that I reject the
what God's
premises
property of omniscience is.
but
simply just because I don't believe that God's beliefs can be compared like you're trying to
no, but
compare them
forget
to
beliefs,
No,
forget
humans.
but
beliefs.
they're not being
We move past
I
compared.
that.
We're
can't
just
forget beliefs;
saying
they're part of the
No,
premises.
but no,
You
one
want me
second
to
though.
forget part of the
Could you for a
premises?
second, Khalil, yeah, because you are a sincere person. We've had discussions before. Can you just
Yeah,
address what I posed to you in terms of these two
yeah,
distinct
yeah,
realities?
yeah.
How would you be able to discern between the two?
I don't know what you mean by what you said. I'm simply just going off of the argument itself. I have two different things that I can do. I can reject the premises because God's beliefs are not comparable to humans' beliefs, therefore the argument would be invalid. And two, I could just appeal to some type of
that's not
Neoplatonism
valid.
where there's the divine intellect and the divine soul, and now we don't have this problem again.
No, but
Wait,
I'm
look,
not. It's
look,
not really
Then the
addressing.
Timothy,
argument
just
would
Timothy.
so then the argument would have failed to disprove the existence of God. I rest
No,
my
but
case.
look. All I don't even know why he brought up the universe example. Look, it's very simple, right? If you're gonna appeal that God, let's even presume that God's knowledge is different from our knowledge, right? And God's knowledge is the type where he doesn't have to justify his beliefs. Okay, sure. Even if you want to say that there is a difference between God's knowledge and our knowledge, as long as content internalism is true, which is what most theists posit, that God's mind existed without an external world, sans creation, right? As long as you believe that God's mind can exist without an external world, we can just apply the same skeptical scenario to God, right? How does God know that most of his beliefs aren't false, right? How does God know that he's not being systematically deceived?
Yeah, so these are just loaded incoherent questions
How are they incoherent?
because God's by definition omniscient, so there's no need to even ask the questions.
No, but we're not. Look. Is omniscience not taken to be that God knows all true propositions?
Correct.
Okay, so does he know all true propositions in all possible worlds?
Yes.
Okay, so presumably, do you agree that God's mind can exist without an external world?
I don't know what God's mind is.
No, I'm just at. You don't need to give me an account of what God's mind is. Do
You're
you
going to
think
ask
that
me about
God's
something that I don't know about. You're going to
do you
keep
No, no,
trying
but
think
to
Darth,
push
that
Darth,
this, and
Darth.
I'm
God
going
Now
to
you
do
have.
keep
you
saying I
think
don't
do
know
you
what
think
God's
that God
mind
can
is.
exist without an external world? Yes or no?
I don't know.
Just refer to it as the universe, please. Darth, it is important. The
Look,
universe is important here
but he's
because he
not
needs. No, no, but
addressing,
that's
he's
part of
just
his
He's
theology.
restating what
trying to tie
omniscience
me down to a
is.
human
No,
understanding about
but
God's
that is
mind, and
part
I'm
of
just
his
But
not going
how
to
is
do it.
theology.
that?
That's the
Look,
only
I'm
way the
not trying
argument
to tie you
works.
into anything. I'm just saying that
It's
as long as there's no contradiction to posit that God can be radically deceived, that there is an external world, you don't actually get to omniscience because omniscience requires that God necessarily knows all true
you're
propositions.
already at omniscience. You don't need to get to it.
Yeah, you're just begging the question against the argument.
No, but Khalil, he just means that when he says
The
like
very thing
is
in
God omnipotent before
question,
the creation of the
wait,
I actually
universe?
think the argument begs the question against itself, honestly.
you can't beg what? You can't beg the question against itself. What?
Yeah, I think it can.
You beg the question. You beg the question by assuming that the conclusion is true. That's what it means to beg the question.
Assalamu
If you're
It's
saying
alaikum
to
that
have the
this argument,
conclusion within the
wabarakatuh.
if you're
premises, right?
saying, if you're saying that this
Yeah.
argument doesn't apply because God is omniscient, while we're even contesting that omniscience is possible, if skeptical scenarios are impossible, you're just saying that the argument doesn't go through because he's omniscient. But that's what we're questioning. We're questioning that very premise. That's the very thing in contention.
Okay. Yeah, so you missed the part to where I specifically said that I don't know what God's mind is, and you're going to have to tie me down on what God's mind is before I can move further with the argument.
But that, like,
Look,
Darth, that's irrelevant though. I don't get it. Like, why do you
omniscience.
keep forcing that? It doesn't matter.
No, it's not Look, do you even know what the argument is? The argument is as long as internalism is true, skeptical scenarios are logically possible. Skeptical scenarios are logically possible, then omniscience is impossible.
I understand. Like,
Right?
if there's something that God cannot know, then
Because
if it's possible that there's something He cannot know.
for everything that the theist wants to posit and say that God just knows all true propositions, he knows everything because he created everything, you could just apply the same skeptical scenario at that point and say, how does he know, right, for certain, in all possible worlds, that he's not being deceived, that he's omniscient? How does he get out of that problem? And the only response is, well, you're just conflating human knowledge and divine knowledge. No, we're not. The
Well,
argument
before
never
you said
states
there was
any
only one
the
answer, and I
argument
just
never
gave you
states
another
any
one.
difference regarding human and divine knowledge.
Now, so before you said the only explanation or the only response to this is blah blah blah, or I think you said that to restate the statement that God is omniscient. Now I've given you another explanation, and now you're saying the only response is that his beliefs are different from our beliefs. So,
You didn't give an
are there
explanation.
multiple
You appeal to
explanations now?
mystery.
But you don't
Yeah, I appeal to
understand.
mystery
If
when
you
there's not a
affirm
contradiction being placed.
if you affirm externalism, that's just to deny that look, you're not even understanding. To say that omniscience is possible is just to say that externalism is true, but that's what we're contesting with the argument.
No, I understand the argument. I'm simply saying is that you're going to have to tie me down to knowing what God's mind is for us to move forward with the premise. I'll just
That's
reject the premise
irrelevant.
that
No,
you
it's not.
stated.
It's just
Then
about whether
why
or
did
not
you
God's
add it in
omniscient.
your argument if it's irrelevant?
Look, how
Why
does
is it in the
God know? How
premises
does
if it's
God
irrelevant?
know? How does God know that he's not brain in a vat?
Okay, that that doesn't answer my question.
It says
Why
it's
would
a
you add
genuine
something that's
question.
irrelevant? Why would you
How does
add
God
something?
know? How does
Why
God
would
have
you?
access to
Okay,
anti-realism being
are we gonna
false?
do this like we normally get along, Darth? Are we gonna do this? I specifically asked you. I specifically asked, why did you add something that's irrelevant into one of the premises for this argument?
It's not wait. What part is irrelevant with the argument exactly?
You stated that God's mind, so and so and so, whatever the premise was. And I specifically stated that I don't know what God's mind is, so I couldn't accept or reject that premise. Now you say it's irrelevant. So I'm asking, why are you adding irrelevant details to the premises of an argument
No,
that goes against the
I said
existence of God?
when you were applying to the argument by saying that the argument equivocates between human knowledge and divine knowledge, I said that was irrelevant, right? We're not talking. We can accept that divine knowledge is different than human knowledge. We're just asking,
Can I
like,
say
in
something?
virtue of what? Hold on. In virtue of what is God justified in believing that he knows all true propositions if it's possible that he could be deceived on that very fact, right? Like,
My bad,
that's
my
what we're
phone
trying
died
to
earlier.
contend.
I'd say it's impossible for God to be deceived.
What's the logical contradiction?
That's a very low bar to meet. I'm saying that it is impossible for an omniscient being to be deceived. Now, what God's mind is, I don't know. So we'll go back to that premise, and I will reject that premise.
It is impossible for an omniscient being to be deceived. Well, that's just to state that Cartesian scenarios are not possible if God's mind can exist without an external world. That's actually just to affirm the first premise that God's mind can exist without an external world, but it's to deny another premise where it's possible
It's not to affirm
that
or deny it.
Cartesian scenarios
It's
go
saying I don't
through.
know what you mean by God's mind.
Dart, can I say something actually? So when I actually listened to your question, when you asked that how does God know? When you pose this kind of question, so you're trying to humanize God, okay?
No,
Because
no,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
false.
absolutely,
No,
absolutely.
that's false. That's false. Do you
No,
think
you're
knowledge
trying
is
to humanize
justified
God.
true belief?
Your definition of God is quite different. You have to know the perfect and pure definition of God.
Give me the definition of God. Is it not a disembodied mind with all omni
So
properties that created the universe?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and what does that disembodied mind, does it have beliefs?
Sorry, Mr. Wood.
Does
See,
that
this is where you would
disembodied
just say,
mind,
I don't know what God's mind is, and the argument ends.
no, it doesn't.
Yeah, I find that to be incredibly dishonest. If you
So
say
That
that,
so
that's
first of
just
all, first of
dishonest.
all, you
That's
have
just
to
to
accept
say
that he.
hang on.
Hey,
I have
Dirt.
incredulity. That's just to say I have incredulity about the nature of God's omniscience. Therefore, I'm not going to address the arguments.
Yeah,
I
God.
mean, if we can play the little game of incredulity, then there's no discussion to be had.
No, there's others in the room that are saying that this is actually kind of like a dishonest argument.
No, because Khalil, you're
No, it's
quick to
not
define
dishonest.
God as a mind, but you don't know what God's mind is. You don't even know if it's a mind. I take it.
What does it mean for
Say,
him to have knowledge if he doesn't justify his beliefs? Let's just go with that.
here we go, conflating human knowledge and God's knowledge.
Well, I just want to hear what the account of knowledge is. What's the
I
account
don't
of divine
know
knowledge?
because I don't know what God's mind is. It's you keep trying to tie me down to this, and it's just
No,
not going
but
to
but
happen.
but
So
Khalil, you can
I
Well,
speak
think
then
you
you
about
should go
can't
back
knowledge.
to the
reject the
drawing board and
argument.
try a new argument.
But
You
Khalil, you
can't. You
can talk
can't.
about
Then
knowledge
if
quantitatively.
you're then if you withhold judgment, you can't reject the argument on any basis whatsoever because you were
No,
posturing
I
the
don't have to
argument.
reject it. I also
You
don't
were
have to accept it.
you you were
The argument is to entail that God does not exist.
no, but
So,
that's not what you
and I'm
said
cool with that.
earlier. What you said earlier was that because God knows all true propositions, Cartesian scenarios are logically impossible, right?
No, I said I don't know
Which
what
is just to
Cartesian
reject the
scenarios are.
argument.
Now you're lying and saying that I'm
I'm not
talking about things that
lying.
I had no clue. Because even
Didn't
Himothy
you
said,
say
you
it
know
was
what? Since you don't know
impossible
what
for an
they are,
omniscient being to be
you
deceived?
okay. Hold on. Let's go back to me saying I don't even know what Cartesian scenarios are. And Himothy says we could break it down some more for you. And now you're lying and saying that I answered
I'm not
questions about
lying.
Cartesian scenarios. I
Did
never
did you
answered a
not
single
say
one
that
about it.
it's did you not say that it was impossible for God's God to be deceived because he's omniscient?
Yes.
Yes, so that's just to deny the argument. The
Okay.
argument
Then
is
I denied the
specifically
argument.
attacking the argument is specifically attacking that premise, right? That omniscience is possible if skeptical scenarios are logically possible.
Yes, if we're to equivocate God's mind with our mind. Yes, absolutely. I
No,
get exactly what you're saying.
no, because even if whatever account of knowledge that you give, the skeptical scenario could just be applied to that, right?
Yeah, I don't see
How
us getting
does
anywhere,
God
Darth.
know in the absence of any good defeaters that he's not being radically deceived? You would just beg the question and just
Hmm.
restate that he knows everything.
Yeah, because that's what we started off with. You asked, is God omniscient? So that's what we started off with.
Yeah, but
So
that's
I
just
mean, I don't see us
it's
getting
just begging
anywhere.
the
I
question.
see us just going in circles, and I don't find this to be productive for
Yeah, that's
anybody.
begging the question.
Okay, That- we'll go ahead and let you believe that.
No,
I don't think
I'm
we're getting
serious.
anywhere.
It begs the question. You're just saying that you're isn't it your original
Oh,
claim
okay, Darth.
that
Do
an
me a favor.
omniscient?
Go open up a room of your own about this argument, because
Yeah, I
we're
don't mean to.
beating a
I don't
dead
mean to
horse
be
right
rude or
now.
God
nothing
has
here,
the
but like,
ability
I
to
don't mean to be
understand
rude
your
or
inner
nothing,
mind.
Yeah,
but
how does
this
he
doesn't
have
really
that
make sense
ability?
at
How does
all.
he know he's not being deceived that he has that ability? Answer me
Okay,
that. That was
that's why I told you that you are trying to humanize. You're trying to humanize God by saying, okay, so human beings have God limitations. So if you are
I
trying
asked
to
very
compare the
politely to
limitations of the
drop it.
human being with God, so that is your false interpretation of God.
He's already addressed that, right? Now the thing is, I find it quite dishonest to go around defining God as a mind, and then when it comes to a problematic argument, you're like, oh, I don't even really know about God's mind. All right then.
What?
I just question if you even know what God is, what you're even positing exists at that point.
I guess the nature of the mind though is like of less importance than it being some kind of container for all these, or for the knowledge of all these true propositions. Like I think everybody agrees that that you're postulating God being omniscient, right? So the mind can, just for the sake of the argument, just be a container for all, or the knowledge of all true propositions. And then what Darth basically saying is, if it's possible that there's something God cannot know, for instance, he does not know that he is a brain in a vat, or if he's a brain in a vat or he's not a brain in a vat, then it would be impossible for him to be omniscient. From my understanding, that's how he was rendering it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I do agree with you, Himoti.
I don't know, maybe if there can be a bit of decorum and then no one's gonna scream at each other, Khalil, you might want to let him back on, and then maybe they can just maybe he can elucidate or explicate the argument and define terms, and then maybe, I don't know, you could understand it better. Maybe mods, those to you guys.
Oh, I don't know. I've been sitting here a while and I still don't understand what's going on. I can't see anyone's hand up though at the moment.
No, yeah, I think because he got moved down, he probably wanted to put his hand up. But I'm just saying, if we reduce the tension a little bit and then everyone just defines their terms, then it may be a little bit